Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spierbauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I released in my newsletter last year my favorite episodes of all time. And today's guest was in the tippity top of that list. And he's back for round two, but with a completely different story to tell and message to share. We have the CEO and founder of Medley Learning, the Brandon Cardet-Hernandez. Welcome back, Brandon.
I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy for you to be here as well. I know that you have been heads down building and meeting with leaders and understanding the current environment in order to help with a solution that really supports some of our most vulnerable students in schools. And I'm thrilled that you're coming back to tell that story.
Really, really grateful that you invited me back. And I had a lot of fun the first time we got to chat.
Well, shout out Allie Rubin one more time for the original introduction that helped us come to be. Because at the end of the day, good people know good people, and in education, there's a lot of good people doing a lot of great things. But I want to hear specifically about what you're working on now. So, Brandon, why don't you tell us how did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself? And I know you've told the story on the podcast already, so maybe specifically gearing it toward what you're building now.
Yeah. So we talked about this before, but we probably left out some pieces because our
Sure.
lives are complicated and they're nuanced. But one thing that maybe we didn't touch on as deeply when we first chatted, I started my journey in this world as a multilingual learner. Back in the day, I'm getting older, we called it ESL. Uh, Both of my parents are immigrants. I was in ESL till sort of the end of elementary school. And in many ways, a lot of my work in education has been shaped around a few experiences in an ESL classroom. And the first was after my dad passed away when I was a kid. My brother and I moved to a new home. And when we moved, we went to a school that didn't have ESL supports. And
Mm,
so we ended up being placed in the same classroom, despite that we were 3 or 4 years apart in age.
wow.
And it wasn't even a classroom. You know this story. It's sort of like tale as old as time. In the basement, what probably was like a converted janitor's closet with an extraordinary teacher who was given a charge that she had not been given before to do something really exceptional and to teach us English. And at that time, it was complicated, right? Like we're in the same room, we're learning different things, but everything's kind of being brought down to a single level. The supports were there, but they weren't great. In many ways, accelerated. My brother struggled more. He's like so many, there's 5.3 million students in America who are multilingual learners. He's one of the many who really struggled to get out of the classification. And I had a very different experience because when I was in, I want to say fourth grade, there was this teacher, Mrs. Warren, who I remember deeply. And I was itching to read The Babysitter's Club, and it was a book that wasn't really at my level, and like the books are coded colors. I wanted to read it, and she photocopied the book in chapters and would annotate sort of language supports across the pages. So she'd like circle hard words and like draw an arrow out that had like a little definition around it. She'd highlight certain passages that like she told me if I'm highlighting it means you probably have to read it twice. And I read that book chapter by chapter. And when I finished that book, I felt like a rock star. And in retrospect, what I really got was a bunch of language supports while I was reading that made content that in a different classroom would have been outside of my level, accessible to me. And that changed the trajectory, the Babysitters Club changed the trajectory of my life in many, many ways.
I need to take a minute there for your teacher. Can you say her name one more time, please?
Is Warren, who I have looked for and have not been able to find.
Imagine this was the moment where we were able to unify you. And I was like, Brandon, please welcome Mrs. Warren to the podcast.
It'd be my moment. It'd be
I
her
know, I
magic.
know. I am not Oprah, though. I don't have the resources of Oprah. But wow, Mrs. Warren, I mean, I would guess, just because I know we're about the same age, I would guess that that level of what we now know to be called scaffolding, as you called it, language access, was not commonly being applied in classrooms for learners, even with the then called ESL classification. Is that true?
Yeah, I hadn't really experienced anything like that. There was a little bit of an expectation at that time that I was going to learn English by osmosis. Some of that is true. Like, being in a English environment, you will start to pick up, turns of phrases and language. But I wasn't accelerating at the same progress as my peers because we know from the research that that requires really intentional support inside of grade level content. And she did that in such a meaningful way. And in a way that we know is just good instruction, regardless of a kid's status. Like she found something that was high interest for me and
Yes.
made it
Yes.
accessible.
Right. Okay, two quick points. One, the kind of awakening that the instruction for multilingual learners that we're talking about right now that has happened that allowed us to get from where it was when you were a child to where we are today is very similar to the kind of awakening that we've had in literacy, where we realize that like just having kids read and hoping they acquire everything at pace with peers is not what's best for children.
Mm,
So but the problem I have, and I know you agree with this, which is why you're building. The problem I have is for multilingual learners, we're not necessarily having an explosion of tools to keep pace with that realization.
that's exactly it. Yeah, listen, there's a beautiful part of learning, and two things can be true. One part is it requires incredible creativity. Like you got to see kids, know kids, and be really flexible and thoughtful around what you're bringing to the table. And at the same time, there are pedagogical strategies that we know work. That are research backed. And sometimes I call this like a research to reality gap. And we saw this with the science of reading. We see this with ML instruction as well. There's a gap between like what's being said at the ivory tower and then what's happening in practice and the time and the professional development and the resource commitment that it would take to bring that research to real life.
So, full disclosure, I think you know the story, but I don't know if our audience does. When I was in my first and second year of teaching, I looped with my students from first to second grade. And as part of the loop, my class was like rather small by the end of the year, which is a story for another time about why that happened. But they added all of the multilingual learners into my classroom.
Mm,
And I'm a baby teacher, right? Second year in the classroom, really not my best version of my instructional self, but I made it my mission to know what it is that made great instruction for multilingual learners great instruction. I actually wound up writing my master's thesis on vocabulary acquisition for multilingual learners. Because at the end of the day, everybody needs great vocabulary instruction. And for multilingual learners, it allows them to unlock, it allows them to keep pace, be involved, and most importantly, feel connected with their peers, both
mm,
understanding what their peers are saying and being able to communicate their thoughts, ideas, and feelings with their peers, which that's mostly what I care about in elementary school. Let's be honest here.
100%.
Okay, so now I've shared my heart, I've shared my story. I wish your tool existed. Tell everybody what is Medley.
Yeah. So I'll tell you this too before we get into that for folks who didn't listen to the our last episode or like just joining for the first time. I started my career as a teacher. I then worked doing district strategy in New York City around school turnaround. I was a principal at a turnaround school in the Bronx and eventually went on to run another ed tech company that was doing really cool work in literacy instruction. So you and I both care deeply about phonics and the process of reading. And at the same time, I was like always thinking about what can we do to support the most vulnerable kids? That was true in all parts of the work. And this idea of scaffolding has always sat with me. Mostly because, and this is me being very transparent, I recognize that as a teacher and as a school leader, I often wasn't doing scaffolding right. I was doing the best I could with what I had, but I recognize that the time it would take to do intense scaffolding, to essentially scaffold everything a young person was seeing who was learning English, I just wasn't resourced to do it. So that's sort of where Medley was born. We wanted to take a kid's proficiency level, align the scaffoldings that support language development within that proficiency level, and bring that to life wherever a kid is so that it took the time off of the teacher. It empowered the student to use their scaffolds when they need it. And it allowed for this other thing that I think is really important, but for teachers to focus on relationships, speaking and listening, and getting to know students in deep ways, because that's where belonging and intimacy happens. That's where vulnerability takes shape. That's where learning really happens. And so I thought with the power of AI, what could we do to make that happen for kids? And so that's where Medley was born with a lot of other smart people behind it. And so essentially, Medley does that. We are a browser extension. We, on the back end, know what a student's WIDA level is, TELPAS level, their access score, whatever the state assessment that you're using to measure multilingual learner proficiency. And then once we know that, there's a series of scaffolds that go along with each of those identifications. So think about this. For a young person who's a level one, maybe that's full translation support, but that should fade because scaffolds should fade. And so by the time I'm a level four, maybe I'm getting cognate support. So I'm really seeing the relationship to my home language. For a level one on writing, I might be getting, there's a question in a text and I touch it. I might be getting response starters and a word bank. But for a level four, I shouldn't be getting that support anymore. It should fade. I'm getting sentence stems. And dictionaries are a really cool one. Like we know every ML student should have a dictionary near them. Dictionaries are really confusing. When you give a young person a dictionary, whether their native language is English or not, it's like powered with a bunch of stuff that you may not need in the moment that you then have to get through, and that like creates cognitive overload. So imagine a dictionary that is able to know what that word is in context. So let's think about like the word wave, if I'm waving my hand or there's a wave in a math problem, right? Like I can then touch that word, get the right definition, and not be overloaded with the other stuff I don't need. But as my language skill grows, I'm getting more. I'm getting a more complex definition. Maybe I'm getting synonyms. Maybe I'm getting antonyms. But at my earliest stage, you're just trying to move me through the text so I can get there. And
Mm.
that's true with audio support and translation support. And then there's this other piece called text engineering. So every multilingual learner teacher who's listening, they're like, I know what this is about. And that's where we like chunk text and we bold complex language and we provide language support inside of it. That all happens, but in a really faded, gradual way. That language support starts to shift and fade away while the language is growing.
And per your incredible teacher from elementary school, teachers were doing this by hand, like cutting up passages, annotating passages for kiddos. Even now that we're digital, like putting spaces in passages, I'm assuming. Like I can't even, I'm having trouble actually visualizing what it looks like in digital format. But this level of, and I'm going to use the word scaffolding here, this level of scaffolding is happening just really was manual for
Totally.
the educator.
Hours of time for an individual teacher. And then just to be real, because the way that we experience content today, it's just so much more agile.
Hmm.
That is impossible to do in a digital space all the time.
Yeah.
And, when you have one or two, maybe none, maybe four ENL teachers in a school, and they're not following students to every period, I might not be getting that language support in my math class.
Oh, yeah, for
Be getting
sure.
that language support in my science class.
And it's not mandated, to be honest. Like the way that multilingual, like required instruction looks like is not through the entire day.
Yeah. So it ideally is lessening the burden on teachers while also increasing the support for students,
Mm.
but really important, not over scaffolding because I think it's well intentioned. I was a teacher who over scaffolded. Like I was like translating everything, word banks for everything. I didn't care if my student was a level one or a level four. Like
Mm,
I was just like scaffolds. I should give scaffolds. And that's coming from a really good place. And who
sure.
wants to see a kid struggle? Like that's true for me as an educator and a parent.
Right.
At the same time, if we really think about the research, it is about fading those supports. But how can
Hmm.
I offer it to you consistently enough when you need it that the scaffold does start to fade? Versus the sort of what I think happens and why we see so many long-term L's, kids who don't test out of status for 7+ years. And then we know what happens. They have 2 times the likelihood of dropping out of school. That it's because we haven't given them the right language supports and developed the English proficiency while leveraging home language, but developed English proficiency at a speed that would allow them to continue to access grade level content in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So let's talk about scaffolding. We use this word all the time. What does it actually mean, and what does it look like when it's done right?
So, scaffolding's an interesting one because we use it, and I think you're right. Sometimes it just becomes jargon. So, first things first is it's ideally there to allow a young person to access grade level content in real time. It's matched to proficiency, so not every student needs the same support, so it should be differentiated. It fades. The goal is not permanent scaffolding, the goal is independence over time. It strategically leverages home language. This is true for ML. So, like, that there's a connection between language, and that doesn't always mean full translation. So, really thinking about when home language is needed. It keeps student in their grade level work. This is really important instead of pushing them into a separate lower rigor track. So my fear is always like releveling text for MLs. It supports both comprehension and expression. So like understanding the text, participating in discussion, producing writing. That's scaffolding at its core. How do I get you to access this text with a recognition of your current proficiency level, not bringing it down, but bringing it to the right place?
Ooh, you've hit a lot of touch points there. One that really resonates that I feel like I want to just dig into a bit is the conversation around bringing the text level down.
Mm,
Again, well-intentioned teachers love their kids and lower
yeah.
the level of rigor unintentionally to feel like they can give the kid a win or help the kid access it.
Mm.
That's a problem.
Yeah, listen, multilingual learners we face a tough challenge. Like we are learning English and grade level content at the same time. And our systems often act in a way, and this is not true everywhere, but sometimes we act in a way that we should wait for one and then the other, right? Like first language, then content. And that's just not the reality of how things are designed, and it's not a motivating factor for young people. That may be true if you're learning a language later in your adult life. Great. But when you are a young person learning language, you want to also be learning the same content as your peers. And it is a fear for me, particularly with AI in this moment, well-intentioned as it is that we're just going to like load stuff up. It's AI slop, as I call it, right? Like we're going to load things into an AI tool and we're going to re-level the text. We're going to decide our kid is reading at a second grade level. And then we're going to take this complex content on Mesopotamia and throw it into a AI tool and bring it down for a second grader. Well, they're going to miss a lot. And guess what you're going to feel? Like you're reading something for a second grader. And guess how that's going to feel? Not great. And so then you lower motivation versus figuring out how to add in language supports that make it accessible.
The first time, so I went to the University of Pennsylvania's Milken Prize
Mm,
competition a couple years ago, and I stumbled into these two folks who made books that were scaffolded or like aid texts that were level appropriate for all types of learners, which is like, to be honest, what I needed when I was teaching. I remember when Newsella, for the very first time, started taking content and leveling it at different levels so that kids could read the same content but on their reading level. Anyway,
mm,
digress. I saw this product. I was so impressed. And then I interviewed the founder randomly on the podcast. Someone was like, you have to meet her. You'd be obsessed with what they're building. And I am so stuck on this concept because fast forward in my career, when I started working in a public charter school in Harlem, my kids came into fifth grade. A quarter of them were multilingual learners that still had not moved through the proficiency levels where they needed to.
Mhm.
And their grade levels were averaging first, second grade reading levels. And I simply, like, again, as one person, couldn't get the text where I needed it to be, both at the class level, the small group. Like, it was so complicated. And my favorite kinds of episodes are when I get to tell these stories and be like, man, I wish I had your tool when I was in the classroom. Like, I just wish I had
Yeah.
this tool when I was teaching.
Me too. I think there's a teacher who worked with me when I was a principal, and she was amazing. I'm going to actually give her a shout out. Her name was Sarah Camascoli, and she was a ENL teacher. And she did this really well. Like I
Mm,
would go into her classroom and she would re-engineer text
mm.
in such a brilliant way. She knew that for our level one, she should be chunking 3 or 4 sentences, and her level fours had 14 sentence chunks. She knew to bold academic language. And for level one, she provided translation support right next to it. And for further levels, she was giving uh, support in English. But she was one teacher.
Yeah.
She spent hours doing that. She was young and like gave everything that I
Mhm.
think eventually could lead to burnout, like we see with so many other teachers. That might not be her story, but I think that's true for a lot of folks. And she couldn't do that everywhere.
Yeah.
Did that in really core instructional experiences, but I hold an incredible curiosity around like how much faster could we have moved language access and development for our young people if I could meet them in period 1 through period 8 with those types of language supports. And that's what
Mm.
we're trying to build at Medley.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about, you've been a school leader before. You've advised at the district level for the largest city in the entire country, largest school system in the entire country. And now you're boots on the ground with all types of schools in the United States. What are you hearing as pervasive concerns around the topic of supporting multilingual learners today?
Yeah, I think many things. And to be fair, given this moment, things are really different depending on where people are. And that's true
Yeah.
in every context, but I think it's really true for this community. I think we understand right now that the gaps are widening. And so the performance outcomes for multilingual learners are not narrowing, they are only growing. That is true from comprehension. That is true when you look at data around the length of a multilingual learner with multilingual learner supports. That is true for high school graduation and high school dropout rates. So we know that there is work to do. I think a few things are very real. There are staffing shortages, something you think a lot about all the time, but there are staffing shortages across the country. These are hard roles to fill. When there is appropriate staffing supports, that still doesn't mean that a kid is getting language support everywhere. And so as districts move, rightly so, to really intentional high quality instructional materials, like how do I offer support on grade level content to a student who is still learning English? That's a really
Mhm.
heavy lift. And then there are these pockets and places where that access is just not happening. And then I think on a different level, there are real concerns around immigration issues. Like our kids,
Yeah.
particularly immigrant kids and kids of immigrant parents, or in communities that have complex immigration statuses. Like those kids are juggling a different lift than they were a few years ago, even if that lift was heavy before. And the teachers are feeling that intensity, whether that's they're seeing that through a student's attendance or just the burden that a young person's bringing into school. And it's why I know this to be true outside of this space, every teacher wants to do right by kids. And most of us get into this profession not because we're like, I am dying to teach you Beowulf, but we get into this profession because we want to know a kid well and we want to change a kid's life and we want to see young people win. And that's different. Like in the university system, people get in there because they want to do research. But I believe in K-12 systems, most of the time we get here because we're like, I really want to be part of a young person's journey and watch kids win. And so I think there's a heart space that's been really magnified in this moment. And so we're seeing educators who are like, I really want to do right by my kids, and I don't feel like I have enough to do it. And that's where I think we have a really awesome opportunity to leverage technology to really bridge the gap in human connection and to accelerate the opportunity for advancing achievement.
I'm really glad you dove into this topic and you've called out a few things that are very much on my mind, which is how attendance is being impacted by students and families' fears for going to school due to immigration issues, due to federal regulations right now. I'm looking at, Fridley ISD over in Minnesota, following the news really closely out of there. Their superintendent is doing, Dr. Brenda Lewis is doing an incredible job amplifying how protective she is of her community and how to make sure that it is a safe space for children to come to school every day, which is like, the bare minimum.
Mm.
And then you think about how attendance issues impact all learners, but
Yep.
particularly our most vulnerable who are already, you know, experiencing. I hate even using the word deficits because they're not deficits. Like, hell, I'd love to speak two languages and I don't. So, like,
Amen.
I'm not
Yep.
calling it a deficit, right? Like, my biggest frustration is that I'm not fluent in another language. So, I was at one point, to be very fair, but time has passed. And yeah, all to say, it is really trying and challenging to think about how deeply, both academically but also emotionally, our kids are being impacted by the world around them, which makes sense. And yet, they're kids. I want kids to be kids. I want them to be innocent and pure. And that is not the reality for so many in our country right now.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I really feel this. And here's what I do know. All of us want to feel smart. And you and I do what we do because we have choices professionally. We do what I do because at the end of the day, we both do what we do. Because at the end of the day, there's a little piece of it that makes us feel really smart. And I think that is true for kids. And it is why rigor to me is the greatest champion for equity. You
Mm.
want to do right by kids, you leave them feeling like they are bright. And that happens when we bring complex things to them and not just let them grapple with it. We let them access it and we make them feel successful when they're in it. And that may not solve every attendance issue. There's not a silver bullet here, but it will build a different connection. It does accelerate growth. We do things that we're good at. That is just the nature of the human condition. We like to do things we're good at, and we avoid things that we aren't. And it allowing students to feel successful. Well, it may not fix every issue that's impacting them outside. It does something really magical that has a long-term impact that I don't even know if we know how to measure.
So, if in 10 years every single school in America has adopted Medley,
Mm.
What what will we see, feel, and know, and what will be true about our learners that have been able to use the product?
Mm. I think we'll see a few things. First and foremost, I think we will increase a sense of belonging for multilingual learners. They will feel part of our communities in a different way. They will get that school is for them and feel like this is a community they're part of. And I think that will have an incredible impact on everyone around us. One. Two, I think we might even increase teacher retention. We said we all want to be winning. We like to feel good. And I think if teachers can feel like they are driving impact more deeply with the right supports, we'll be able to hold people in this very complex, really hard to sustain work with greater intentionality. I think three, and maybe the most important, we'll start to narrow these gaps. And we're going to start to see that achievement gaps are closing and that our multilingual learners are gaining language proficiency at faster rates, therefore having success in other parts of their academic careers. And I think maybe, last but not least, we will recognize language and bilingualism specifically as a superpower, not as an intervention strategy, but as a core part of instruction, something that really can transform a young person's life and is something to be valued and appreciated, and not something that requires skills for that we need to intervene on.
Here, here.
Hmm.
And it's wild. I like the time that I am with you ever in life goes so fast. It's wild. I'm about to ask you my last question here, and that is, what advice would you give a multilingual learner instructor, teacher starting, or a paraprofessional, aide, whatever it may be, starting their career today?
Oh, well, I'm going to give two then, because I chat. So, for
Please.
anyone who is starting as a para or a teacher's aide in that work and they are being used, because it's so true, and I'm saying this as a Latino person, we are often there and we are doing translation in the front office. We are working hard. So, for those folks, don't forget your journey and that you can be front and center in any space that you want to be. And so pay attention to the pipeline strategy in your district and work your way through it, if that speaks to you. But for a teacher who is starting out in this space, here's my advice. Don't lower don't lower the expectations for our kids. Don't use AI as a way to reduce rigor and be really intentional around language supports in real time. Want you to use Medley, but at the end of the day, I want you to see kids win. And that is giving them what they need so they can access the text that their peers are accessing at the same time.
So incredibly beautiful. Brandon, you are such a light. I could opine about a million topics with you, but we'd need a whole podcast just of us talking to each other hard to do that. But in the meantime, I will thank you for coming on, sharing other parts of your story I hadn't heard before, and also sharing about this important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your commitment to kids and to the broader industry and just the new ways that we are trying to drive change and make this world a better place.
That's very kind. And
Mm.
thank you to everybody who's tuning in today. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.